Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. As the title suggests, we are looking finally into Gaffer. I have gotten several messages, several DMs on my social medias that I should please do some Gaffer stuff, and finally I found some time to actually deep dive into this. I have been using Gaffer for several years now, working at Image Engine as a lighting supervisor, and it's an amazing application. It's a node-based VFX application that is mainly designed for look dev and lighting purposes. There's also compositing involved, but that is not as developed as the rest. And I will be showing you how to work with Gaffer, what it is in this series moving forward. We will be looking into a really basic introduction, which is this one, and then we will be slowly increasing the complexity with shading, with lighting, multi-shot setups, with render passes, output stuff. So it gets really in depth, and you can think of Gaffer is essentially something similar to Katana or Solaris and Houdini, but it's a lot lightweight and it does need some more support. The software is great for day-to-day use, but if you want to do a little bit more complicated things, it is recommended that you have some kind of technical background in Python and scripting in general, just to understand how the concepts within Gaffer work. As usual, all my scene files, everything that I'm talking about, showing about, is on my Patreon, so I would always appreciate any support over there. Gaffer is fully free. It's an open source tool. You can download it at GitHub. I will share all the links that you need to get started in the description below. Any other requests in regards to Gaffer, please do let me know as well. I'm always reading and replying to the comments on my channel. And yeah, let's get into Gaffer introduction and have some fun. Alright, so the first question is, what is Gaffer actually? Gaffer is essentially a lightweight node-based VFX application that allows you to easily apply or create workflows mainly for look dev, lighting and compositing. It is an open source tool nowadays, and it's used by several companies, and one of the bigger ones are Schneider and of course Image Engine. It has been used in several big blockbuster productions like Chappie, Wolverine. I'm now at the gafferhq.org website where you can actually see what it's all about. You can download the tool. You get some documentation, which is very well documented, especially getting started. And I will walk you through the process after you have downloaded it. So initially you download it from GitHub, put it in wherever you want, and then you just have to launch the CMD file that is included in the installation. Usually you can run it from where you copied the file to. What I always like to do is create on Windows a bat file. It's essentially an executable where you can point it to a location, and you can see I move my Gaffer installation, which I download from their website, to this location here. And then my bat file essentially at the moment is doing nothing. It's just executing the CMD command, which is then in turn launching Gaffer. So if I double click the bat file, which lives on my desktop, double click it, you can see the CMD pops open, and then boom, Gaffer opens at the same time. So this is Gaffer. By default, the UI scale, depending on your monitor, is extremely small. So the first thing that you would do is change the UI scaling. There is no option within Gaffer. It's a Qt based application. Qt is like an image framework where you can build UIs using Python. And the first thing what I'm doing, I'm enabling back my environment variable, set Qt scale. I can probably make this a little bit bigger. To 1.5. This is what I've set up. Let's save it, relaunch Gaffer. And this is now scaling the UI up, depending what you want to do. Probably for this tutorial, I'll make this even bigger, so you can now see this is nice and large. And probably for the tutorial, let's try 1.75. Maybe that is even better. And then the next question is, what do you do in Gaffer? And as I said, it's a look dev lighting pipeline tool, or not pipeline tool, but rendering tool, and also compositing. But what render engine is being used? And by default, it's using cycles from Blender. There's like a nice connection, like a nice framework where you can render straight with cycles. Granted, I do not have much experience with cycles, so I will be using this, or at least moving forward with Gaffer, using Arnold. And how do you get Arnold installed? You will just go to your Arnold website, Autodesk Arnold download, you download the Arnold SDK, not Arnold M2A or K2A or H2A. You would download the Arnold SDK. You put it somewhere. You can see it's under C software in my case. And then all you have to do is to set Arnold root, enable that. And this is how you have Arnold connected with Gaffer and then setting the UI. I also enabled this variable, set Gaffer cycles hide, which then in turn just hides all the cycle prompts, because I don't care about cycles in this instance. I just want to use Arnold. And if I save my bat file, double click Gaffer bat file, this now launches everything as I would expect. If I hit tab, I can see now Arnold. You can see all the Arnold stuff in here, and my UI is bigger, and you can see the cycle stuff is removed. All right, as you can see, the UI is very lightweight. There's not much of buttons or shelves or anything like you would see in Houdini or in Katana or in Maya. It's very simple. There's not much going on, and that is by design, because there's a lot of things that can be configured. And I have to say, as a disclaimer, Gaffer as a standalone for private use, you need to have a little bit of background knowledge in like lighting TD or shading TD. It's just to have a Python background, understand how things work using code a little bit. It's not as crazy as I make it now. It's still very user friendly, but there are things that are not there out of the box that would need some tinkering. So how do we get, so let's first go through the menu so you see what's going on. So I've got about Gaffer, you've got preferences. And again, there's not much settings to play with in Gaffer. It's just kind of, this is for the viewer, like the view, the wireframe grids, how often you want to use backups. And the thing about backups, it does it automatically. So if the scene should crash or anything, there is always a backup, only if you save the scene once. So if you are in an untitled session and it crashes, it's gone. But once you save it the first time and then it crashes, you can always open up a backup. So that's pretty neat. And you can see it's using also some variables, script :directory, script name, backup number. So this is kind of internal variables that you can call up as well. Similar as you would have, let's say in Houdini, where you have hip name and hip location or whatever. So that's very similar to that. Then you got file menus, the usual stuff. What is under settings? Settings is essentially your project settings. You got your variables. This is kind of global variables. Project root, pointing to my home. In Windows, it's I think your documents. Then OpenIO, OpenColor.io is where you set things. I have a variable on my system on Windows, so this is pointing to that. You've got other ones as well. Mine is 1.2, so it's a little bit outdated, but that's totally fine. And then you can create user variables for whatever use case you might use them. And that is pretty much it for settings. Then you've got usual edit, undo, find stuff. Layout is how you want to prepare your UIs. I just leave it as default. Help examples are not working just yet. I know that they are working to make these connections work with Windows. On Linux and Mac, they work just fine. OSL references in here, not connected yet. And then tools, which are default Arnold tools for caching stuff, clearing caches, profiling tools for monitoring your performance. And that is it. And then if you want to bring up a menu, you can see there's lots of tabs here actually. And you can always bring the tabs up by hitting this little grid icon. These are all the things that is available to you. And you can always split any view and then hook things up, move things around as you see fit. So layout back to standard. This is now the standard UI in Gaffer. All right, so what do we do? That's the big question. What do we do? So you can hit tab as usual. That's a node-based system. So tab is always to bring up the menu. Let's do a sphere. And this is now a simple sphere. And a sphere has settings. So under the node editor, you can do divisions, the size, the radius, all of that, what kind of type of sphere it is. But how the hell do you see it, right? And then you got these weird icons. So it's all, there's a learning curve definitely involved. So you can see that this little focus point, focus node, is each window has this little thing in the corner. And this is kind of what is currently the active mode, as I would call it. And if I hover over a node, you will see if I hover over the corner, I get that same little focus thing here. So I click it, you can now see, oh, my viewer got activated because now my focus node is tied to the viewer and now they're in sync. And whatever I do now, is what I see in the viewport, essentially. So that is kind of how this stuff works. And there are different ways. You can also have this correspond to node selection by hitting N, and then this view is different, this little icon. So whatever I select is now active. So if I create a box, oh, it's not a box, it's a cube in this instance. You now have a cube. So if I select this sphere, if I select this cube, and you can see the same thing in the hierarchy view, which is Maya's outliner, whatever is in your current scene is listed on the hierarchy view. And again, this is now set to focus node, so it will only display the sphere. If I again hit N on my keyboard, now it's the node selection, now it's on cube, now it's on sphere. So that is kind of how this works. And also important, you can hit P for pin. If I select a node, and I go into like one of these views and hit P, you can see that this is now pinned, and this is now pinned to this sphere node. So if I do selection, it doesn't change. If I change focus modes, it doesn't change. Explaining all of this because I will use all of this stuff moving forward, and you might be confused what's going on. So I'm going into these basic things at this moment right now. And then you also have bookmarks, very powerful and very helpful. So let's say I have a parent node, so I'm connecting things, parenting this and this, and you can now see if I hit P on the parent here, you can now see I've got both nodes in here. Or if I change my focus node and change this to focus, then this is kind of the same thing. And now let's do standard options. Standard options are Gaffer's standard options for a scene. Let's make this focus node here. And now let's say I want to create bookmarks. I can hit Control 1. And you can see now there's this little star 1. And then let's say I want to always be back to my sphere 2 and my cube 3. So now, let's say I want to see the cube, I can hit 3. If I want to see the sphere, I can hit 2. And if I want to see the results from the standard options, I can hit 1. And the order of execution is from top to bottom. So if I view from 1, my scene graph is evaluated from the top to bottom. Similar to the views, I can pin my hierarchy view to bookmark 1. You can see it's now pointing to standard options, or I can put it to 2 or 3. So these are the kind of the tools that you have to tie views to the current location in, or to the node you want in your graph editor. I sometimes say node editor because that's how it is in Maya, but in Gaffer's graph editor, where you see all the nodes, and then the node editor is essentially the attributes of the selected node. Whatever you select, this is where you have the settings of that individual thing. Then you can double click things. Double clicking essentially breaks out the settings or the node editor for that specific node, and it doesn't change with your selection. So you can click all these things, have them floating windows, and if you have 2 or 3 displays, you can populate your screens with your floating windows, and you then don't need to essentially need the node editor. Then moving to the next important one is the scene inspector. This is essentially what is happening in the scene at the current location that you are looking or viewing from. And again, top right corner, set to focus node, which is at the bottom. So if I now select this node, I can see whatever is in the globals at this selection, at this moment in time. There's not much, to be frank, because we don't have output nodes, we don't have any options set, nothing like that is set. So this is pretty empty at this moment in time. But if I select the sphere now and I go to selection, this now shows everything on the sphere, every transform values, attributes on the sphere, primitives of the sphere, memberships where it belongs to. It's essentially collections in Houdini and sets in Maya. So essentially you can create a set or a collection that points to certain locations in the scene graph, in the hierarchy view. And then you've got set editor, which is essentially the collection window, the window that holds all the current sets that live within a scene. Let's say you have a car, you want to make a metal set, and then you put in the chrome, wheels, you put everything that is metallic into that set, and then you can just assign a shader on that specific set. That's kind of what this is all about. Image inspector is mainly for 2D stuff that we won't be talking about in the beginning. Python editor, you have a little Python console which has autocomplete. Usually you would work with either of these Gaffer nodes. Lots of stuff in the API and documentation about this. We won't be going into depth in this video. Then you've got light editor to edit lights that it finds in the current scene. So if I create an Arnold light, always just, I don't know, I'm still mixed up with all the different names, But quad light, we can just parent that in here. And then now you can see we have a light in the scene, focus node, and then you've got the light here as well. And then you have all these options on the light. You can control all these settings in this one view. And there's edit scopes. I will talk about that in a bit. And then render pass is pretty new, where you can create a new render passes, have settings for this. Pretty nifty stuff. Also a little bit more advanced. We will go over this in another video. And then animation editor is to obviously animate things, change curves, interpolation, all of that. Primitive inspector, similar to the scene inspector. This is housing the attributes of a geometry essentially. So if you have, for instance, p-scale or width or UVs, they would live here. Normals, face varying is UV. So imagine you have in Houdini, you create a noise pattern that is going over the vertex points. Then they would show up under here, and you can read them in the shader and all of that sort of stuff. So this is how you would inspect an object. So this is mainly the layout stuff, I think, and I talked about most of them at the bottom. Obviously, self-explanatory. Timeline. These are your move viewing handles. A couple of render region stuff. You can have Arnold render in the viewport. Nothing will happen right now, but this is Arnold in the viewport. You have things, diagnostic modes, pretty nifty stuff here. I'll talk about that in a bit. Camera selection. I'm not sure what this was. Oh, that's the FPS and the inspector. So you can just toggle a couple of things in here. Whatever you want to select. This is also helpful. This is how the hierarchy view will be expanded. RGBA. Sure, I think this is gamma, exposure, gamma. I'm not sure what this one actually does. Display transform clipping. Oh, okay. It's just a clipping view. All right, so this is kind of part 2 for the editor. This is just going over the introduction of the layout. And now we will be looking into the basic nodes to get, let's say, Arnold render started. Very basic. We won't go over too much details, but let's have a look quickly at my example scene. All right, so now that we kind of know the basics of most of it, I think let's just get started in how to actually render, and we will build this scene up. Let me just save it. So now this is saved, and I would say let's get going. So the first thing, I don't want to work with primitive objects like spheres or cubes, whatever. So Gaffer ships with a Gaffer bot, and you have to pull it in using a scene reader node. Similar as in Houdini, the file node. This reads Alembics. I actually don't know what else. SCC files, USD files. I believe that's it. So file name, you can see it's a weird file name. It's actually reading a Gaffer root variable and then points to resources Gafferbot caches Gafferbot SCC. So this Gaffer root is obviously set in the CMD file, and this just points to wherever you have installed Gaffer. So now let's hit N in my hierarchy view. You can see now hierarchy view is set to node selection, and my viewer now as well. What you see right off the bat is that we, instead of seeing our little sphere or cube or Gafferbot, we just see a bounding box. And this is done to save up memory. So it's at the moment, it just in memory is this little bounding box here. And you can then open up in the hierarchy view the location. You can see it's collapsed to all these lower things, and things open up and you see stuff finally showing up in the viewer. What you can do, several things. You can just click that little, if you hover over Gafferbot at the right, you can just hover over this thing and click it. This will expand all locations without actually opening things up. So it's essentially a viewer to expand it all. If you have 10 or infinite amount of locations in here, you would need to either Control A or Shift select them to enable this. Or what I sometimes do if the scene is not heavy, but this has to be done with caution because it could explode your machine if you have lots of stuff. Let's say you've got instance forests or whatever, and you go to up top left and then say expand all. This would expand everything in the hierarchy view in your scene. So it could take a long time to do, and it could be extremely heavy for your memory. Just keep that in mind. For simple scenes, I always do that because it's just nice to see everything expanded. But for big scenes, it's a no-no. Like I use Image Engine in production, and this button is quite tricky. But yeah, the new addition, not super new, but quite new, is that you can actually select things in the hierarchy view. And let's say I only want to see the torso. I can just click this and now just the torso is viewed. Or I can, another example is I can expand everything and then I can click the red button. Not sure. Yeah, and then it does hide things based on what you don't want to see, right? So now if I want to hide the torso, I can click and everything is now hidden again. So quite a few ways to hide and show things. Let's see if I can actually unclick everything. There we go. And this is now how we did have it in the beginning. So this is now my object, my little Gaffer F2. You can rename nodes, Gaffer reader. Okay, so what's the next step? We want to have a render camera. Without cameras, you cannot render pretty much. So tab camera will create me a camera. You have options for name. You can change the mode for aperture and focal length. I like to do that coming from a photography background. This is our lens, our focal length. Let's go 105. I like that pretty much. Clipping planes, you can have depth of field options where your f-stop is, where your focal distance is. You can enable depth of field here if you want it or not. And then you can hit tab and parent, which will then parent the one to the other. The one is the camera, which is then parented to the Gaffer bot. You can now see if I go to parent, we now have a camera. A good habit, I like to do that, is to group things because now everything is kind of floating at top level. I always like to just use a group node after every, let's say, department, whatever. I want to, for the Gaffer bot, essentially, my group node is just called geo. It's just, at least for me, it's just I'm a creature of habit. So I like to just have clear locations in my hierarchy view. And the second group is called camera. And if I look at the parent, we've got now geo, camera, And then we also will have one for lights, but not in this basic example. So now we have these two things. And if I click now here, render camera, it doesn't have any because it doesn't really know what the render camera is. And you can go camera, you can force it to be this camera, but there's no render camera yet. Render camera is defined in the standard options. Standard options, there you go. Standard options are essentially scene globals, scene render settings, not render settings, scene globals, I would say is a better word, where you can define what is my render camera. So render camera in this case would be, I can obviously look for it here, go to camera, double click or hit OK, and then this is populated. I can say how it should be fit. So if I now look through my render camera, this is now jumping to that. You can see the path is properly set. Let's say I want to do 1920 by 1080 as my render resolution. And that would be probably it. This is where you can also enable depth of field globally. And let's just expand the whole scene as I showed you before. And now we want to move the camera. How would you do it? You could go to camera and move the transforms. You can go into the perspective view, move it with the transform handles, or you can look through the render camera, what we are currently doing. And then you can enable this camera icon in the left toolbar here. That allows me now to freely move the render camera. You can hit F to frame the selection, or to frame the scene, I believe. And then you can maybe frame it to interesting look, little 3/4 view here of the Gaffer bot. And then you disable this again, and then the camera is locked. So pretty straightforward. You can see whenever I click away, obviously because it's following the node selection, the view disappears. I don't really like it, so I'm just enabling the focus mode and changing this to focus mode, or hitting tilde on the keyboard, the one left of the one on the keyboard, and then you can see this is now set to focus mode. And the same for the hierarchy view. I'll do the same. So now you have this stuff pretty nice and locked. How do you render? That is the question. The name of the game is how do you render with this tool? There's no render view by default. You have to create it. There's no render settings for your renderer. You have to create that as well. But for now, standard options is the name for these settings for camera pretty much, and renderer, you wouldn't touch that. Default renderer is none, so you can select all of these default renderers. We want to select Arnold as our default. render sets, we don't have any of this. We have no statistics. All of that can be ignored for the moment. And now an important note is output. Output is essentially defining what will be rendered. And you have two options, batch or interactive. Batch meaning offline rendering, not in the Gaffer session, meaning you would submit this to a render farm or a local dispatcher. These are the options to render in Gaffer, or interactive, which will be in this active session. So we want to go interactive, and beauty, I'm not sure what this really is, but you would go to Arnold because we will be using Arnold, and then we would pick beauty. If you open this up, you have a couple of things here where the render goes to, and you can see that it's looking for a display driver, which is Gaffer, and then it's looking for some kind of catalog thing, whatever that is, right? And that is it. So talking about catalog is a thing that collects your rendered images and displays them as well. So let's create that catalog. You can see it looking for images. It has settings where they will be saved to, but not too much to worry about. It just is a catalog that will collect your interactive renders. And then you would need an interactive render. And this is the last step to actually render interactively in Gaffer. So let's change the focus mode to this guy. And you can see now we have a log. We've got your render as set because we set it in the standard options. And we have a play button. So let's hit play. What happens? Rendering of watermarks. That's fine. No licenses being set. But now, where the hell is our image going to? I would think it's going to the catalog. And it is actually going to the catalog. But I still don't see it. There's no render view or something. So the trick is the catalog is the thing that actually is the render view. So what I tend to do, I do bookmark 3 just out of habit. It's easier to reach. And then I can just hit 3 in my viewer, and ta-da, this is now my render view. So you can see the toolbar went away. We've got this play and pause buttons. There's a warning for my render log, and we've got exposure controls, control click and drag, exposure control, shift, bigger increments, and voila, this is our first render using Arnold in Gaffer. And this was the first kind of basic example I wanted to show you. So let's select it, tab, backdrop, title, basic, intro. And this is the very basic one. So, and now the next steps will be to kind of reuse this setup and just incrementally show you more and more stuff. I think this is a great way of learning because I will be starting with super basic stuff. You might know it already. You can skip it. Maybe you learn something, maybe not. And then we just incrementally go to the next one. All right, so now let's have a look how we can get a little bit more sophisticated. So I'll just copy this basic intro box, paste it. So now we've got 2 of these boxes, right? And let's just name this one a little bit basic Arnold or something, just to have a little bit of a distinction. Arnold. All right, so now we would shift focus, select this. This is my catalog 3. So now this is my new render view essentially. We were working with standard options, and I was also saying something about Arnold render settings. So there's a note Arnold options, which is essentially Arnold render settings. You can drop that in here, and you can now see your settings that you know and love from other DCCs like Maya, Houdini, whatever. And you can have your render settings, sample settings, adaptive sample, all the same stuff. And a cool thing which I like is always to go to logging, console, verbosity, and one is sometimes I like info if you need stats, and then one is progress to just show you render progress. Timestamp is cool, but it's not really important really for this case. And then now interactive render. If I hit render now, we should now see we get some nice stats. You can obviously it's super quick, nothing much going on. And as I said, in the Arnold options, you now have your sample stuff. You can enable, I don't know, 3 samples. You see it gets already nicer. And then, yeah, we can already look at maybe some depth of field. Go to render, go to camera, enable depth of field. everything is blurry as hell because our focal point is not set properly. Obviously we would play with it until we get the right thing. I will have a video that allows you to kind of link it so it's a little bit easier. Somewhere here you can see we're getting some focus. Yeah, something like that. Now this guy's in focus. If we want it very shallow, we reduce the f-stop. You can now see hand is out of focus, face is kind of in focus. So that's depth of field enabled. And then sometimes we're now rendering at full HD. If you hit home, this is actually showing, I think, the right pixels. Yeah, so you have F to frame it to the current view size or home to show the actual pixels. So this is now 1080p. And let's say for preview rendering, we want to have half res. So in standard options, you have the option to adjust the resolution. So resolution multiplier, I would go 0.25. It will now change it to be 480 by 270. So this is now my coda res. But sometimes you don't always want to go on these settings. So what you can do, leave it at 1, and you will now see that this options will also be written into my global scene inspector essentially. So you can now see that we have render resolution set here, and we've got the render resolution multiplier set on 1. All of these options can be tweaked anywhere in the node graph without going into a standard options node. And by that, I mean you can create an options tweak node. I use that quite frequently to do quick overrides, let's say for a different render pass or a different shot. You can do these things quite easily. Node editor, or double click a node, and you can hit plus from scene, and this will list all the options that are available to you. So I want to change the resolution multiplier. By default, it's 1. Different options you can add to it. You can add 1, so now it's 4K, or you can replace it. You can create new, subtract, all of that fun stuff. And I want to set this to 0.25. So now this is an options tweak that could live in a preview, batch render, or whatever. If you can disable it by hitting D, so you can now see the resolution changes. Pretty nifty stuff. All right, so that was it. So now let's go into a more advanced setup. All right, let's copy the box, paste the box, and move it here. And let's call this shading and lighting. This is what Gaffer is known for, shading and lighting. Obviously, we won't go into crazy shading networks or anything like that, but I just want to show you, as before, the basic stuff. So once we get going, you will be very familiar with the stuff I will be doing. All right, a good habit is to do things close to the things you want to change, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is if you have lots of geometry coming in, it's best to tweak them before you merge them with your main data stream. It doesn't matter for small scenes like this, but for big scenes, it does matter actually. So what I mean by that then is, let's say we want to create a shader for the Gaffer bot, and we want to create crazy shading networks. It's best to do it close to where it's being set into the scene because of evaluation times. In this simple case, as I said, doesn't matter much. So I will be just moving this a little over and moving this a little bit to the side because our Arnold standard surface takes some space. All right, so standard surface. This is our shader that we know and love, base, specular, all the same stuff. And then how do we assign it? We do a shader assign, drop it in here. It has these in and out points, a filter, pretty interesting stuff. You can assign it to specific elements, or if nothing is selected, it will just assign it to everything that is coming in at the top here. And this is a shader context, so you just can only connect the same kind of what's the word? It's not context, but you know what I mean. Data types, I guess, is a good way to describe it. And at the moment, as I said, this is now assigned to everything. If I select anything now here and go to the scene inspector, you can now see that I have the standard shader assigned to everything. If I would say I just want it on the key, I can just drag it onto the node. You can see that the symbol changes. It's now an equal sign, and you can create a path filter. And now if I go to arm upper, there's nothing. And this trips me up all the time. And I can explain you why. or it tripped me up just now again. So you can see the hierarchy view is pinned to the focus node, but we are doing some scene graph changes here. We're parenting, adding groups, and then my actual paths are quite different than at this location in the scene graph, quite different than what they are down here. That's why the assignment just didn't work. It did work, but this location does not exist at that point in time, at that point in the graph editor. So good thing is you would just change this mode to node selection, and you will now see that the actual location of the key is here. So you can Control C it, or you can drag it again. And now you should see under Scene Inspector that this now only lives on the key, which is proper. So if you go back to the focus node, and now you can see that the key only lives here and it does not live at any other location. Whew, that was a long thing. So let's just disable this. We don't need it. Now the shader is again assigned to everything, which I want, basic stuff. We want to change, let's say, our shader to be 18% gray. And you can obviously go in here, click on the color, change the value, or you can type in the values, or you can drag the values, or you can hit Control G, which is awesome. It kind of groups them. And now you can just Control click and drag the first one, and the RG green and blue follow. So we just type in 1.8 for the default stuff. I like my specular a little bit rougher, so let's put in 0.6. This is always kind of my go-to gray shader material. And now if we go back to the bottom and we hit render, you can now see it's gone. Why is it gone? Alpha is there. What's happening? We don't have any lights. Arnold needs lights. Without lights, you don't see anything. This is how it works. So we want a light. We can just parent things in the data stream. I just move things down, and I just do another parent and drop it in here. And we can create a, should we do this already? Yeah, let's just do a dome light. And oh, that's a UST light. I always mix it up with the sky dome light. That's the one we want. Drop it in here, parent it. Voila, we've got a white light, which makes everything look great. Again, similar story. You can see the sky dome light just pops in here. I don't like it. I can group it, or you could also go in the parent node and change the destination to be somewhere, and then it creates you a subgroup as well. But usually, to be just nice and clean, I work with these groups at times. Again, just my kind of workflow. LGT, light. People know what LGT is, at least I do. Geo camera light. If you follow my tutorials, my Maya outliner always looks like that. Okay, so now we've got the sky dome light. Simple thing. But now, how do you connect the texture to it? There's no option here. Map shader, it expects something here. We've got format angular, but you can see the ports. We do have a color input or a shader input, but we want to use an image node, which is AI image, which is Arnold's image reader, and you would pipe in a file name in here. So let me just grab one. And now we do have the studio light in here. Let's connect that up to color. And if we hit render now, you can now see we do have something that is lighting it. You can see it's weirdly, there's some weird shaping going on. And that's because the default format is angular. We want lat long, longitudinal. This is now a proper HUI. You can go to the sky dome light transform, change the rotation, maybe go in 10-degree increments, and you can see, woohoo, it is lighting our little butt. And you can see how really quick it is with Gaffer. There's literally no delay. And I could also do a split view here, split left. We can move this over. We can create a new viewer, pin this to my focus node, and then expand everything like that. We can look through my shot camera, render camera, click that camera button, And if I frame this properly, you can now see how nice and quick this is. And this is running on the CPU at the moment. And if I change this to the GPU, it will be even quicker. Where do I change it to GPU? In Arnold options, obviously. GPU, render device, set it up. Sampling, we can go up to 10, and then we can enable adaptive. We can do crazy things like 50. And then if we now hit render again, there might be a little compile. No, it didn't compile. And now you can see it's pretty much live interactive. There's a tiny bit of a delay, but this is the best what's the word? The best implementation of Arnold than I've seen in any other applications. Maya or Houdini is a little bit more laggier, so this is pretty nifty. And if you want to denoise, you can easily do that. Let's denoise that stuff. There's a called optics or Odin, or there's I think one more, and then it's just in an imager node, Arnold imager. Drop that in, hook it up to optics, boom, denoised. So now we have a denoised image right off the bat. So pretty cool. Granted, we are rendering in a very low resolution. I can disable the options tweak though, and now we're back in 1080p, and it's still pretty good. It's still denoising, and on the fly I can disable it if I want to, and then there you have it. Pretty nice. High quality renders pretty fast. So that was another step. And in the next one now we will be working a little bit more in depth for shading and a little bit more in depth with lighting. All right, now we will be looking into a little bit more advanced shading, and I will be also talking about lighting. We will be using edit scopes, and then for shading, some user data reads to make things a little bit nicer. All right, so let's just position our little gaffer bot in a nice place that will catch some nice highlights once we place some lights like that. And then we change our view modes again to our new catalog and new interactive render. We for now just disable denoising. Maybe we do go half res instead of quarter. And then we leave it like that, everything the same. What we will be doing now though is we will create a box which will house our look dev. So you select the nodes you want to kind of box up, and you just type in box and it creates your box. What is a box? It's a group that houses the selected nodes like this. In and out, similar like in Nuke or in Houdini. And then you can do stuff in here. It's kind of a cleaner way. You might be wondering, what are all these little pluses? You can hook anything on any of these nodes, and then it will create you an input mode, and then you can, let's say, have a camera inside of this if you want that. So lots of things to play with. If you don't like the visuals of it, you can double click the node or go to the node editor, little cogwheel top right corner. You already see this is getting into UI editing and stuff like that. We will talk about this stuff. At the moment, we will ignore it. We only will go to edit UI, and then you've got plug creators, and you can just untick them. If you want to color the box, feel free to click on color and change it. Let's say we make this nice and blue, and then our box is nice and blue. And hit F2, rename it, or go up to the top here, look dev. And then we now dive inside this box, and as again, we can just hit the render button and we have a render cooking. It's still denoising, or was that legacy? Okay, I was just in a wrong interactive session. Okay, now we're back in it here, and going back to our look dev, jumping in, we do now have our shader assignments, and at the moment there is no path. It's just everything to the same thing. And if I change the values, you can now see things do change. And now let's maybe play a little bit with different shader assignments, maybe color. So I was saying let's do some custom data reads from the vertex points. And what we want to do, we just create a standard options, standard attributes node, go into attributes, and you'll see there's display color. And if I change display color, let's say to red, our Gaffer bot in the viewer OpenGL turns red. Let's say we want to randomize this based on the scene path. We can right click this, display color, and right click the field, and you can randomize it. And then I think this is now just in the one thing. Maybe it goes to everything. And then you can have a seed, and you can now see that my colors are changing. It's just the first one though, which is maybe let me try this again. So you can either click on just that little value field, which would be red, green, or blue, or you can right click on this little color field on the display color value, and then you can select randomize, and then all these RGB components will be randomized, and you can see the color that it would create. As I said, we can change it. You can, let's say, have a base color of, I don't know, yellow, green, and then the seed would just be random based on a seed number. But you can specifically set a seed variable by right-clicking and go into preset and select scene location, for example. Or you can define anything you want, but this is kind of how you would do it. And now you can see that the Gaffer bot is colorful. Let's say we want a kind of a blue guy, and we just don't want to change too much the hue. Let's go lower on the hue. Maybe keep these the same as well, just maybe a slight shift like that. And then if you want to change the hues, this will just be all in the same ballpark. But let's imagine this is our bot and then we like this color. The render though, if I hit play, still looks gray. So that's what I said. This is now kind of storing the data onto the primitives. If I go to my primitive editor and I select the Gaffer bot, I thought it would live under primitive inspector, but it's actually under the scene inspector under attributes. So let's do this. And then you can see render display colors being set here. So that's kind of where it's stored. And back to the graph editor, we can now read this data in our shader. So pretty standard Arnold stuff. You would just use a data RGB, and then the RGB would just be display color. Oh, what did I say? Render display color, right? Let's go back, scene inspector. Render colon display color. And then if we hook it up to base color, let's hope it works. It doesn't. It does not work. I always like to do like a false color. So if it's this color, then I know something went wrong. And it's actually without the render. And now you can see we got a match. Our Gaffer bot is blue. Our display in the OpenGL is blue. And what I didn't show you, we can still, if we go back to the view here on the left, we can actually toggle this to be Arnold. Which looks like this. If we go to perspective, this is now, I think it's really freaking out because of the watermarks, but this is now rendering Arnold in the viewport. And you might be wondering, why the heck is it still gray? We did assign a shader, right? We did do that because it does actually render in the actual render view properly. But the viewport renderer has its own hidden settings. And by hidden, I mean they are very hidden. There is no obvious way to pull them up. In Houdini, it's D for viewport options. In Gaffer, it's this little hamburger menu next to the drop-down menu where you have some settings. By default, it's going to the CPU, shading is flat, lighting is direct, texturing is preview, no denoiser, all of these things. So flat shading means I will assign the fastest, quickest shader you can get. Preview is I will assign you the fastest, quickest Lambert standard basic shader, which looks like this. And full means I will actually present you with what is being assigned to each location. Lighting, similar. Direct is just no bounce, one bounce, or full bounce, which reads from render settings. This is just hard-coded to one bounce. Texturing, similar. Preview textures, low quality, I believe, or full texturing, the actual ones. And then, yeah, same stuff. That stuff I won't be going into details. But this is your viewport render. Pretty nifty, really helpful at times. And now let's do some overrides, I guess. Let's just say we want to make the torso be metallic, for instance, right? So you could do it in all sorts of different ways. I will just do a basic way now. I'll just copy the shader assignment and the standard surface thing, and I will hook up the same out color to my base color. And then all I'm going to do is change or make sure the hierarchy view is set to node selection, and then torso, I'll just drop that guy in here. And then we would actually need to start the render again. And then I would change the base to metalness 1. And now you might be wondering, why doesn't it do it? And the reason for that is that the shader assignment, I believe, applies it to every location in here. You can see it in the scene inspector. You can see it's here, it's here, it's here. It's all over the place. So to each leaf node it's being assigned to. Let's call this one base and this one metal. If I now go back to my shader assignment 2, you can see that I have metal assigned to torso, but the leaf of the child of torso is still assigned to base. And that's because there is no shader assignment at the top level. So what you can do, you can just drag the Gaffer bot to the top here, and then all the children are inheriting from its parent position, which is Gaffer bot in this case. And then I'm overriding a child location with metal, and then every child of the torso group will then inherit from its parent, which in this case points to metal. And that's how this works. You can also see that there's this little inherited box or text, which just shows, hey, I'm actually inheriting it from a upper location. And if you don't have the path filter, if you disconnect the path filter, again, each location will actually get the assignment. So that's maybe a pro and con talking about this. So metal, let's bring this back to 1. Now we have a metallic torso. Specular, we can play with the roughness like that. Now it's nice and crispy. And this looks like now a metal body. If you want to do triplanar, you can create a triplanar node. If you want to create noises, you create AI noises. There is OSL stuff, which I will not touch in this video, but there's lots of stuff in here that makes cool shaders. And now let's have a look into lighting. At the moment, we just have this default sky dome. And for lighting, we have this thing, which is the sky dome, the parent which pipes in all the lights. So what you can do, which I like to do, is create an edit scope. Edit scope, I didn't brush or talk about this yet. It kind of, the name implies what it is. It's a scope, a area in the graph editor that allows you to make tweaks to certain things in this exact location. Again, I don't like the plus signs by default, so I always disable them in the UI. Like that. Let's call this edit scope maybe light. I sometimes call it light control, light editor, or light scope. Let's make it yellow. And why? Because of lights are yellow, which they are not, but anyways. Light scope, right? What do we do with the light scope? And I kind of talked about this in a previous video. We have at times these little windows, these little things here. Edit scope, none. Now there's a light scope, very interesting, very promising. And let's say I want to change the sky dome, right? But I don't want to change it where it's being created. I want to change it in this specific scope, and scopes come in really handy if you think about shot work, where you have render passes or different shots, and you have a light scope for shot X or Y, where you need to do overrides, stuff like that. That's the logic. That's where you where I need your head to be in. For basic scenes, you can totally just do it on the light itself, right? No one is stopping you from doing it. But in a production sense, doing it on the light is not always recommended. So let's say we want to change the exposure. Changed it to the edit scope. And now if we are back to the focus node at the bottom, which we are, make the same for the hierarchy view. And now we can select the light, the sky dome light, and you can see the inspector pops up. And now we can do double click, override this, replace it. Let's go 2 steps up. boom, bright as hell, bright gaffer bot. And if I go into the edit scope, or first of all, if you look at the skydome light, the exposure didn't change on the light, but it changed inside here. On the light edits, hey, this location was changed, replaced by 2 exposure. Kind of that's the thing. And then also in the light editor, you can do the same thing, which is pretty nifty. You don't have to select the light actually to do these edits. I could select the gaffer bot and still be able to tweak the lights. You can now see though that the edit scope is not selected. So if I select the edit scope, you can now see, hey, this blue edit scope, this guy is actually tweaking exposure. I can now overwrite this 1. You know, I can tint it. I'm not sure if it works if the texture is assigned though. Replace it. Oh, it does work. So if we keep the value at 1, we multiply it red, we can tint it. So that works pretty nice. Disable it. I don't like it. Solo it. Boom. We just have 1 light, doesn't matter. Solo doesn't matter. We can mute it though. Boom, off. So that's all you can do in the light editor. Pretty nifty. And then obviously settings, samples, contribution, where does it do its things? We don't want to see it in the render. I don't like it. I want black. And just a disclaimer, you should never have black as a display because it really messes up the contrast of the image. You should always have a background to actually evaluate it better. I learned it the hard way in production, so it's always a good habit. Anyways, too much waffing. Now let's do first, oh yeah, I can actually see the edits too. That's nice. Where things got changed. Actually, let's go just back to exposure 0, or yeah, let's just keep it on 0, back to where it was. And now let's create a quad light, AI quad light. Drop it in here, group on, we are falling under lighting, light editor displays it as well, and the viewer as well. So now, lighting stuff, right? So let's disable the skydome and work on the quad light. If I select it here again, hierarchy view, focus mode, light scope is enabled, focus mode. We now have these, we can obviously move things. As you know, we can move lights with the move handles. We can scale them. Yeah, WERT. Q is for selections, like the usual buttons. And then we've got render region, but then we also have lighting tools for spotlights, which we don't have in this case, but we have this one at the bottom, which is pretty nice. Light position tool, enable that. By default, I'm not sure why that is the default, but it works maybe for other people better than for me. But you can see there's a little information at top left. Shift V to place the shadow pivot, and V to place the shadow target. So let's try it. Shift V. Let's click in the middle, and V to place the target. So okay, I did it invert. So let's just move it here. Now it means this is where my shadow is traveling on. You can see it's super low in exposure. We can hit I or go here to enable the inspector. Boost the exposure. Let's go up, 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 up. Boom, there's my light. We can click this handle, move the light back. And I think we can scale the light to make it bigger. Does that actually? Yeah, it does actually work. Make it bigger. So this is now the shadow placement. And again, we can hold V and move it where we want the shadow to be. Let's say the usual thing that you usually would do is do a specular placement, or a specular being highlight, or a diffuse placement. Diffuse is mainly if you want to place things and illuminate them front on with a diffuse light. Let's say we want to illuminate the top here, we can do that, or the legs. That just works based on the normals of the light. Or you move it to highlight, which will then place the specular ping at this exact location. Let's make the shader actually a little bit specky and not as dry looking, so we can see anything. 0.2, there we go. There's our spec. Or we can actually leave it at 0.6. Go back to coding 1, and now it has a coat. There's also something called shader tweaks, which I didn't talk about. Shader tweaks, which kind of does what the name implies. You can change a shader down the line somewhere in your graph, and you can point it to where you want it to be, and then you can set it to Arnold surface from affected, no shaders affected, from selection, nothing selected. So if I select my geo actually and then go from selection, this should have worked, I guess. It does not work on inherited shaders, and all the selections I tried below here were in the scene inspector were inherited, so that's why it didn't work. If you find a location that is not inherited, you can drag it in here. And now if I go back to Arnold surface from affected, now you can see, you actually see the overrides or the options that you can change. And if I, let's say I want to change the roughness of our metal, I can then find, this is again, if you get a note, hey, in this specific shot, can you please change the metallic roughness? This is kind of how you would do it. Specular roughness, hit OK. You can also just create your own float override and put in the attribute name if you know the name. So now if I go back to rendering and go 0.6 and hook it actually up, then you will see that it does actually change it. So this is a shader tweak, which is nifty as well. And then what else can we do? We can talk about more light placements, but I think I talked about that, how this works. We can copy and paste this pretty quick. Go back to focus mode, collapse this guy, quad light 1. We can then go placement based on highlight V, click on this side. Again, our exposure by default is pretty low. Look through actually the render camera, we can click again. And then on light 1, we can boost the exposure by 5, whatever. And this is kind of the same idea. And make it, I don't know, bigger. Can replace them by maybe 10. Pretty big light. And then change the color. Let's say we do like a red or something. Replace the color, change the saturation, change the values, hue. And then this is kind of what the light looks like. And we can, as I said, boost exposure, maybe go 10. And yeah, we can move it further back if we feel like it. There's also aim controls, parent controls. So there's lots of ways to control the look of the lights. And again, we have the light editor. Make sure the scope is enabled once you're on the light editor. Should be easy to set up. Yeah, and I think that covers the basics. And then render path editor will be a little bit more advanced because we will be using scene variables and output task nodes and all of that. But yeah, I hope this gives you a pretty good example or idea how you can work with Gaffer. As I said, this is an introduction to Gaffer. There's lots to take in. It's overwhelming in the beginning because it's a completely new tool set for everyone. But it's a free application. It's a free software. The developers are super active on Discord and on the GitHub repos. So it's very well developed. Great feedback, super versatile, extremely flexible, and these 4 little boxes I brush upon are not even scratching the surface really. There's so much more to dig in, and you can see there's just so many nodes to deal with. And in production at Image Engine, we have a lot of proprietary tools obviously that I can't talk about, but for the most part, we use the basic nodes, and there's just so much cool things that you can do with this. So I hope this introduction was not too basic or too complex. I think it had a good balance of everything. I started really simple and then just increased the complexity a little bit. It's still, in my mind, pretty straightforward for the most part, but I get, coming from no Gaffer experience, this is actually a pretty good starting point. So for every newcomer to Gaffer, I would probably recommend this video because it will be the stepping stone to all the videos moving forward. And as usual, if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to read them and apply them. So see you in the next one.